Hey everybody, what's up? It's Cameron, and recently I've been going through a lot of different interviews for some full-time jobs. These interviews have ranged from investment banking to asset management to consulting, and I've learned a lot over these last couple of weeks. I think all of the information that I'm about to talk about is going to be extremely helpful for you, whether you're applying for a full-time job or a summer internship. Also, a lot of these things will be pretty relevant to finance or consulting, but I think it also could be applicable regardless of whatever industry you're applying to. As I started off with, these last couple of weeks have been extremely busy. I have had a lot of first rounds, super days, and everything in between. So I've really gotten a lot of experience with interviews, how to approach them, how to be successful in them, and I'm really just ready to share it all with you guys here today. So with that being said, let's get into it. So chances are, if you've already gotten to an actual interview round, it means you've done something right. So a lot of these things might seem somewhat obvious to you, but I think it's really important to mention nonetheless. The first thing, and again, like I said, something you've probably already done to a certain extent up to this point, but it's still extremely important moving forward, regardless of how much of it you've done, is networking. Networking was definitely one of the aspects I was lacking on last year when I was applying for all of my internships. And so I learned from my mistakes and definitely made sure to ramp it up this year as I applied for some of these full-time roles. As soon as you find out you have an upcoming interview, I definitely recommend you reach out to as many recent hires to that position as possible. It's important that they're recent hires just because a lot of the times companies' recruitment process might change, so their interview questions, things like that, could go through quite a bit of change over the years. So if it's someone who maybe recently just accepted a role 9 months ago, 2 years ago, whatever it may be, that's going to be extremely valuable. Most likely they'll know the recruiter, they'll know kind of the entire process, and they can also provide you some good insight onto the actual questions that are asked. Usually if someone went through the process more than 5 years ago, that's ancient history to them. So it's really important to reach out to people who have gone through the process somewhat recently, just because it'll be a little bit more fresh in their mind, and they might have a better idea kind of how they prepared and can offer you some of that advice. So obviously it's important to just network with as many people as possible when hoping to get a role, but I think specifically when preparing for an interview, it's important to, like I said, reach out to those recent hires just because it's most fresh in their mind. Some of the questions that are really important to ask during these quick conversational calls or messages on LinkedIn are things like, what is the format of the interview? So is it extremely behavioral? Is it technical? These are really important questions to know and will somewhat shape the way you prepare for the interview moving forward. If you know the interview is going to be extremely technical, then that gives you some insight as to what you need to do to prep. If you know it's going to be very behavioral, then it gives you the opportunity to kind of reflect on some of your experiences, your resume, and just be ready to talk about yourself. So, like I said, it's important to kind of understand the actual format of the interview, and if the email you got from the recruiter doesn't necessarily provide this, some of those recent hires will be a very valuable tool in learning this information. Also, another aspect of this that could be extremely valuable is if you know who you're interviewing with. So let's say if you are interviewing with 2 VPs from the firm, a lot of the times the recent hires can kind of give you a little bit of context as to, the personality of these people, what they're kind of like, what you can expect. And that's just really helpful to have an understanding of the people that you're going to be talking with prior to actually hopping on the Zoom call or meeting them in person. So this is the first and probably the most valuable tip as far as the actual benefit it will provide you, and that is networking. So in case you completely strike out with messaging people on LinkedIn or through university connections, I think another great platform to go to is to do some research on the internet. So obviously, as we all know, the internet has everything we could possibly ask for. And so sites like Glassdoor or Reddit, a lot of the times have a lot of information about interviews. I know for myself, for a lot of interviews I've had, I've been able to find the actual exact interview questions on Glassdoor, which is obviously extremely helpful. Now, clearly, it's not going to work like this every single time, but it's really important that you kind of check Glassdoor, maybe check Reddit, and again, that'll just give you some more insight as to what to expect so you're not blindsided during the interview. People on Glassdoor will most likely let you know if it's super technical, super tough, things like that, and it's just a good idea always to just have as much information and have your expectations ready to go when you go into those interviews. Wait. Before we go on in the video, I think it's pretty clear I've been talking quite a lot about doing research. And in order to do good research, it's important that you have tools that can get the job done. And I've been really fortunate to be able to use my entire Dell XPS setup these last couple of months to prepare me for all these interviews. So you can see I've got my laptop set up with my 2 monitors, and that's been such an effective tool these last few months. You can see the screen space is just insane, but at the same time, it doesn't just look beautiful, it's also extremely powerful. The Dell XPS laptop comes with the Intel Core i7 processor, which means, I can easily manage 3 different screens at the same time. The computer can handle it all extremely well. If you yourself are interested in any of the Dell XPS products, check the link out in the description below. And with that being said, let's get back into the video. So now that you've gone through the networking aspect, you've checked Reddit and Glassdoor, you have a bit of a better idea of what to expect. Now, for a lot of finance and investment banking roles, the interviews are going to be extremely technical. And I know this can be quite daunting. I know when I was going through this process, and I'm still going through the process, this is definitely the scariest part of the interviews. It's what stresses me out the most the night before, leading up to it. I'm always dreading whatever those technical questions may be. Now, if you're a finance major or accounting major, then hopefully, a lot of the stuff that's going to be covered in these technical questions are things you've learned so far in your education. But at the same time, a lot of it might be pretty niche to investment banking and definitely requires some outside learning. There are definitely a lot of paid resources that you can go to as far as preparing for these things. I know Wall Street Prep, WallStreetOasis all have pretty good, investment banking interview prep guides. I personally did not use any of those. I think, the beauty of the internet is that so much of it you can get access to for free. The easiest thing to do, and something that I did to prepare for some of my interviews, was just look up on Google search standard investment banking interview questions. There's no lack of websites that have plenty of resources with this, but it'll really give you a good idea reading through these articles, kind of what the standard questions are. Now, obviously, the amount of questions that could be asked is virtually limitless, but if you understand the 10, 20 basic questions that are most traditionally asked, that'll really be helpful and will really give you the foundational knowledge to be able to attack any other technical question that could be asked. But like I said, if you're applying for an investment banking or any other finance role, obviously the technical competencies of yourself are extremely important. Unfortunately, having that technical knowledge won't necessarily set you apart, but if you don't have it, it definitely can set you apart in the wrong way. So that is that next tip. Definitely do your research and understand the technicals going into the interview. So on top of the technical or behavioral questions that might be asked, it's also really important that you have a good understanding of the current financial markets. I've heard of interviews in the past that were 30 minutes, and it started with the interviewer asking the person, okay, you have 30 minutes, tell me what's going on in the market right now. And that's definitely a pretty daunting question if you don't know what's going on. But luckily, there's plenty of ways to stay informed on the financial markets, on the economy, and frankly, this will most likely be a huge part of the job, so it's really important that you kind of start that knowledge now. Whether it's through a daily newsletter like the Morning Brew, or subscribing to YouTube channels, or following Twitter accounts and Instagram pages, no matter what way you go about it, it's just important that you kind of incorporate reading and learning about the markets, whatever's happening, into your daily routine. I know for myself, I started reading the Morning Brew every single day about 3 years ago, and that has made a huge difference on my life. Since then, I've definitely expanded into a lot of other areas. So now I follow a lot of Instagram pages and Twitter accounts that really keep me up to date on whatever the heck it is going on in the market today. Like I said before, most likely in a lot of these interviews, they will ask you some aspect of what's going on in the market, how is this going to affect our company, our clients. So it's really important that you have a good understanding of the markets today. And this is probably the easiest thing to do and incorporate into your daily routine. And it's just a good habit to start for the rest of your career. The next thing that is extremely vital when it comes to preparing for your interviews is knowing the company. This is something that certainly can be overlooked at times when you're applying for a lot of internships and you feel overwhelmed and you have a lot of interviews going on. But it's really important that you do a good amount of research on the company before you go into the interview. Some of the things that I like to do before the interview is go on the company's website, research some of the core values, maybe some past deals or transactions that they've been a part of, and then also maybe some recent news about the company. If you do these 3 things, it's extremely helpful and will give you a really good insight as to what's going on with the company. Also, it's really important to understand the core values. A lot of the times the interviewers might even ask you, oh, what core value of ours do you most align with? So you definitely want to be prepared for that question if it comes up. And just in general, it's really important that you understand the values of a company, while applying for the role to see if it's really what's best for you. So this is definitely not something to overlook. It's really important that you know the company because you don't want to be blindsided by any questions that might come up about the company. Next up, something that should be hopefully obvious to a lot of you: prepare 5 questions for your interviewer. Pretty much at the end of every single interview, there will be time for you to ask questions to the interviewer or interviewers. I always make sure to have at least 5 questions prepared. I don't always get to all of them, but it's definitely important to have more questions ready than you need. And of course, there are times that I fly through them, and I think it's also important to be thinking of questions as you go through the interview. This way it doesn't seem too forced, and it's really important sometimes to kind of create that personal connection, and it shows that you're listening to the conversation. So to do this, a lot of the times when I get insight as to who my interviewer is going to be, I look them up on LinkedIn, see if there's any specific details about their personal history, their career, that would be valuable for me to ask. So I can definitely make an entire other video about this, but one of my favorite questions to ask someone who's been at a company for, let's say, 3, 5, 10 plus years is, where do you see the company going in the next 5 years? And that usually always warrants a different response from each interviewer, and it definitely shows that you care about the company and your own long-term career growth. So that is one of the final tips, and that is prepare at least 5 questions for your interviewer before you go into the interview. And finally, the last tip in order to prepare and be successful in these interviews is to be confident in yourself. I think it's so important that you believe in yourself and you believe in the hard work that you've put in to get to this point. I know it certainly can seem daunting. It's easy to have imposter syndrome, but it's important to just remember all the hard work that you put in to get to this place. Trust in yourself and trust in your abilities, and let that confidence shine through, and it will take you a really long way. So that's the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly have a lot of experience with these interviews. You can probably tell by the lack of uploads over the last couple of weeks. It's been quite a busy time for me, but I just wanted to get this video out for you guys so you can have a little bit more insight as to how to prepare and succeed in some of these interviews. As always, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me on Instagram right here at Galbraith. I'd love to help you guys out. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know